Jenna Ellis becomes the third lawyer to plead guilty in Georgia, where Donald Trump and 18 others were charged with conspiring to overturn the 2020 presidential election.
I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse.
Her guilty plea is the latest, following that of two other former Trump lawyers, Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro. For the latest on this case, I'm joined by Tamar Kellerman, senior reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. You know, what's happening in Washington is significant. What's happening there is significant. Tamar, it seems every time we turn around, someone else is cutting a deal. Why is this domino effect happening right now?
Well, because I think folks are seeing the kinds of deals that are being offered to other co-defendants. 19 people were indicted here in Fulton County in August. And if you think of a racketeering indictment as kind of a giant pyramid, there's people at the top of an alleged conspiracy who prosecutors are really focusing on, folks like Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani. Who can they cut deals with? At the bottom, the lower and the mid-level players who can help give them information about those bigger fish at the top of that pyramid. We appear to be in the middle of those types of dealings. So these folks who have pleaded guilty over the last couple days get prosecutors closer and closer to Donald Trump and his inner circle.
I mean, it seems like there's been this momentum building on behalf of prosecutors in these last few days with these plea deals coming together. I mean, how did we get here? I mean, what is going on in the overall investigation beyond, as you describe it, trying to get people at the lower levels to flip up the chain?
Sure. Well, the first two that we saw last week, Ken Chesebro and Sidney Powell, who were two attorneys, they both had filed for speedy trials, and jury selection was set to begin for them last Friday. So they were kind of under the gun to cut a deal with prosecutors. Prosecutors did not want to have to go to trial, show any of the evidence that they had, give any sort of advantage to Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, some of those other big fish I was talking about earlier. So it sort of made sense why they would want to cut deals with those two. But now we're kind of entering this phase where things are going to slow down for a minute. We have these remaining 15 defendants who are now not slated to go to trial in Georgia. We don't really know, but it's looking into next year. At this point, I think prosecutors are going to do whatever they can to try and cut down on the number of co-defendants, like I said, so they could focus. And now I just think it's a question of who wants to cut a deal. They kind of see the offers that are being made to some of these people. Jenna Ellis today pled guilty to one felony for aiding and abetting false statements and writings. Maybe folks look at that and think, I could plead guilty to something like this, and that may be way better than the prospect of jail time.
Right. And you make an excellent point there about how it allows them to not lay out their case in court early and sort of hold that back. But these lawyers, like Sidney Powell was on the news nonstop during this, and she famously said, release the Kraken, sort of in terms of exposing this fraud that she alleged. What do we know about these other lawyers?
Well, first of all, we know that some of them, their livelihoods are at risk. If they end up having felonies or going to jail, they're not going to be able to practice law and keep going with their livelihood. So there's an incentive there for them to want to take a plea for a lesser charge. Many of them, as part of their plea deals, prosecutors acknowledge they aren't crimes of moral turpitude, which kind of opens the doors for these folks to be able to keep their law licenses. It's also worth noting that with the exception of Donald Trump, most of these folks are not super wealthy. Of course, these lawyers don't make nothing, but they also might not be able to sustain the tens of thousands of dollars, even more, that it's going to take to retain their own pricey lawyers in a racketeering indictment, a racketeering trial that could last upwards of a year. Those legal bills start piling up, and all of a sudden folks think, hey, getting this over with now might not be the worst thing.
So what's the level of cooperation? I mean, it probably spares them enormous costs, maybe spares them serious professional sanction. Are we going to see them as witnesses against Donald Trump and the real big fish in this case?
Potentially. As part of all of these plea agreements, these defendants are agreeing to testify when called. They all cut videos with the prosecutor's office, like pretty much immediately after these agreements are struck, kind of laying out what they know. Prosecutors can lock them into a story there. And then they can decide as they go, these prosecutors, as we get to trial, who do they want to call? We don't exactly know what information these folks have to offer. Maybe there are some things that haven't been made public that could really help prosecutors, or maybe these DAs decide it's not really helpful, but they have agreed to testify when called upon.
Right. So 3 have pleaded. There's still 15 plus Trump. Is there any sense of whether these 3 could tip to a 4th, tip to a 5th? Are you getting any sense of that from where this case is going?
Well, it's important to look at the roles that these 4 people who have pleaded guilty, who they implicate in all of this. Jenna Ellis, for example, worked very closely with Rudy Giuliani. She worked closely with another co-defendant in Georgia named Ray Smith. And in the one count that she pled guilty to, those folks were named in that as being part of this conspiracy. I would look to them to see if they're more willing to wheel and deal with prosecutors now that they've kind of been directly implicated in all of this. You can only assume that Jenna Ellis has dirt on some of these people. So I'd be watching some of them. I'd be watching to see who worked closely with Sidney Powell, for example, with Ken Chesebro, and perhaps those are the next dominoes to fall. Another dynamic to look out for, we're seeing from ABC News right now that Mark Meadows, the former White House chief of staff, has been cooperating with Jack Smith's team in Washington in the federal investigation against Trump. He was also indicted here in Georgia. Could he be cooperating here? That will be a huge question.
Yeah, so obviously when you see former lawyers pleading guilty for a defendant like Donald Trump, it raises the stakes in terms of their vulnerability in a situation like this, and who knows where this Mark Meadows news is going to go. Are you seeing Trump's legal strategy changing as all of this rolls out? What are we seeing from the former president's side of the equation?
It's very early at this point. We have not seen Steve Sadow, Trump's Atlanta attorney, argue anything in court. We've really just seen him sign on to some other court filings that other defendants have filed. But so far, his attorney has been projecting plenty of confidence. He doesn't think that Jenna Ellis or Ken Chesebro, 2 of these latest plea deals, he doesn't think that would do anything if they testify truthfully to hurt the former president's case. I'll be interested to see more, especially once they go more public with some of their attacks. But it also really depends who's cut a deal, who's left with him at the defense table at the end of the day. I really doubt that it'll be 14 other people by the time we get to trial.
Tamar Kellerman, senior reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks so much for your time. Great stuff.
Thank you.